Okay, so on today's live broadcast, I'm going to be talking about 1099 questions. So LeeAnn sent me a bunch of questions that I'm going to answer. But before I answer these questions, I want to say something because LeeAnn had put a comment in one of the questions that somebody asked, and she was actually right with what she said. And when I went in and I answered the question, I didn't mention that she was right in a certain area. What she said was, if the person that you are dealing with is a real estate agent, so if you're paying rent to a real estate agent, you don't have to give them a 1099, and that is 100% true. So usually, if you're paying rent to either a real estate agent or a property manager, then you don't really have to give them a 1099. And this is if you are a salon owner or a salon suite owner. So in one of my blogs, I mentioned that whether or not to give a 1099 to your landlord, I said it depends. So it depends on whether or not they are in business, whether or not they're in the business of renting property. If they are actually in the business of renting property, then yes, they require a 1099. If they are a real estate agent or a property manager that you pay, then no, you don't give them a 1099. If the person you are paying is the owner of the building, but the real estate that they own is more passive income. In other words, they're not necessarily in the business of renting property. They just happen to own property. And if you're paying them, then yes, they get a 1099, but it goes into box 1 instead of box 7. So it goes in box 1 for rents rather than box 7, which is non-employee compensation. That's why it's important that you sort of, either speak with an accountant, so that way the accountant can possibly send questions to your landlord to find out if you are required to give them a 1099. So I wanted to just say that first and foremost. Okay, so another thing that Jack Trisha from East Tennessee. Hi, how are you? Okay, so the first question that I was asked is, I rent a suite. Do I need to send them a 1099 miscellaneous? Do I get anything from them? Okay, so if you rent a suite, you may or may not have to give them a 1099. Now, the first thing you do need to do is to give them a W-9. So you want to give them a W-9, let them fill the W-9 out. If after filling it out, if they check the box that says that they are a corporation, then you don't really have to give them a 1099 because it's not required to provide a 1099 to a corporation. If they say they're an LLC or a partnership or a single member LLC or sole proprietor, then yes, they get a 1099. Now, the only thing about suites is you now want to know whether or not the owner, the landlord, is a property manager, or if they're in the business of renting suites, or if they just own the building. So once you establish once you establish the answer to that question, then at that point you will know whether or not they're required to receive a 1099. And once again, you want to contact an accountant to possibly send that landlord questions so that way they can answer the question for you. Okay, so question number 2 is, I am a booth renter. I am a booth rent salon owner who provides retail for stylists to sell and pay them commission. My accountant said this is legal as long as I put their commission on a 1099 miscellaneous. Is that correct? So basically the question is, you're a salon owner, you rent booths to your independent contractors. In the process of doing that, you have a retail section, and therefore you provide commission to the booth renter if they sell retail from your salon. And the question is, are you required to give them a 1099? And the answer is yes, you are. But I always say that if you're going to have that type of setup in your business, in order for you to really, really try to keep that line of demarcation between you, the salon owner, and the booth renter, you want to also mention this in the contract. And once again, I'm not an attorney, so I would suggest that when it comes to writing up contracts, that you contact an attorney to make sure that the contract is valid. Because just because somebody signs their name to a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to hold up in court. It has to be a valid contract to hold up in court. So I would suggest speaking with an attorney and having them help you construct the contract. But that being said, if you are going to have an arrangement where you are going to give a stylist commission, then I suggest that you put that in your contract, because you want to spell out everything. When it comes to money, you want to spell out every single thing within the contract. And if you do, if the stylist does sell retail on your behalf, and you give them $600 or more for retail sales, then yes, the answer is you do have to give them a 1099. Okay. So let me see if there are any questions in the comments before I continue. I don't see any questions. Okay. So the next question is, how do you fill out 1099 miscellaneouses? Can you explain the different pages that need to be filled out and who they have to go to? Okay, so this question would have been a really good question back in the day. When I say back in the day, I'm talking about prior to the IRS preferring e-filing and prior to e-filing being a lot more convenient than doing things by hand. But yeah, the 1099 has several pages. I think it has one for the state, one for the federal, one for you, the recipient, and one for the person that's giving it to you. So, back in the day, before e-filing, you were supposed to hand each individual a copy. So one is attached to your tax return when you send it to the state, when you send it to the IRS, and then also you, the recipient, will keep one, and then the person that gives it to you also keeps a copy. But nowadays, that is almost not even really, that's almost null and void, only because most of us e-file our tax returns. So when you prepare the 1099, if you use a system, and I think I sent a link to a software that I use for 1099s, and I think I shared it with you guys. Now I'll share it again today. But it only costs about $3 per 1099. So all you got to do is go online, prepare the 1099, and then e-file it. Go straight to the IRS, and that's all you have to do. And then you just have to print a copy and send a copy to the recipient. And that way they can, and when they e-file their return, and they'll hand that to their accountant, and when they e-file their return, the information automatically goes to the IRS. So nowadays, there's really no need for, handing every single person a copy, or rather you can give them, or rather there's no need handing them a particular copy. Before, you would want to hand them the right one where it says for the state and then, or for the IRS. Now I just usually just send out the recipient copy to the person who is getting the 1099, and that's all I usually do. Okay. There's a question from Jack Trisha, and the question is there a penalty to the renter when a landlord of a booth rent salon who is also a stylist working behind a chair does not want a 1099 miscellaneous? Okay, that's a really good question, Jack. And it's not a matter of whether or not they want it or not. It's a matter of what the laws are, what the rules are. So to answer your question, I'm going to put a blog link in the chat that you can read. I wrote a blog about that. And that blog pretty much explains to you what you need to do if your landlord refuses to provide you with the W-9 that you need to prepare their 1099. Now, that being said, keep in mind that when you start this ball rolling, it could cause you to get fired, because you're going to have to do some things that the stylist is not going to like. Okay, you're going to have to literally withhold. So what happens is, if they refuse to give you the information that you need to prepare the 1099, you are still required to prepare that 1099. Okay. Now, once you prepare the 1099, you're likely going to receive a letter from the IRS instructing you to, moving forward, you have to now withhold a certain percentage. And I think it's what is it? I want to say it's 20%, because it changes. It varies sometimes from year to year. I think it's 20%. So in other words, if your booth rent is $200, the IRS is going to require that you withhold $40 and give them $160. Now you know that's going to be a problem. You know that they're not going to like that. So that is the answer to your question. But just keep in mind that it's probably going to cause some problems between you and the salon owner. So let me go ahead and put the link in here so you can actually read it and then make an informed decision as to what you should do. Okay, I'm trying to reply back to you. Let's see. I'm trying to reply back. Okay, can't seem to figure out how to put the link in here. Okay, but I'll do that later on. Okay, so the next question is, okay, I have to pay taxes on the rent I receive each month. Do I add the rent charges, or does it come from my income received? Okay, I think what she's asking is, she has booth renters who pays her rent every week. She wants to know that because she has to pay taxes on that rent, is she supposed to add an additional amount onto the rent to cover her taxes? And the answer is no, because you're paying tax on the income that you receive, the revenue you receive. So if you receive $200, you're required by law to pay tax on the $200. Now let's assume that you say, oh, I'm going to go ahead and just add add an additional amount on there to cover the taxes, and you decide to add an additional, say, $40 to cover the taxes. Well, guess what? Now you're paying tax on $240. So so the answer to your question is no. You just collect your rent and you pay taxes on the amount that you collected as a whole. Okay. All right. So the next question is, I contracted with a makeup artist for a bridal party. Do I give them a 1099 miscellaneous? And the answer to that question is yes, you do. So whenever you're paying somebody money, you always have to give them a 1099. If you're paying them over $600 or more, you have to provide them with a 1099, unless you pay them with a credit card. So if you pay them with a credit card, then you don't have to provide them with a 1099. Or if they, after filling out the W-9, so in other words, when you start, negotiating the contracts with a makeup artist, you want them to fill out a W-9. That's part of the whole negotiation. When they fill out the W-9, you can then determine whether or not they need to be, you need to give them a W-9, a 1099. And that's going to depend upon the box that they check. If they check that they're a corporation, then of course you don't have to give them one. But if they check that they're LLC, sole proprietor, or a partnership, then yes, you need to provide them with a 1099 if the services that they provide are $600 or more. Okay. Let's see, any questions in the comments? No questions. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. It says, I paid the salon owner over $600 in rent, gave them a 1099 miscellaneous, and filed a copy with IRS. Can I get in trouble if the owner does not report my rent payments as income? Absolutely not. No, you're not going to get in trouble, because ultimately it's up to the person who receives the 1099 to report their income. Bottom line. The only thing the IRS cares about is that you gave them a 1099. So what happens is, if for some reason you should get audited, and the IRS or the state, they're going through your return and they look at your expenses and they see that you deducted, let's say, $6,000 for rental payments. Okay, they'll look at that $6,000 and they'll say, okay, do you have 1099s to back up, the $6,000? Well, if you filed the 1099 with the IRS, you're good to go. Then the deduction is, of course, it's allowable. The next thing that's going to happen is, if the owner didn't report that money, they can clearly see from the 1099 who you paid, and they're going to look at the person's name, the address, but the main thing that they look at is the social security number or the FEIN number, your EIN number, the business ID number. They look at the business ID number and they determine who that money went to. And they're going to go in the system and see, did this person make that payment? And if they didn't, then, they'll go after them. And one other thing I want to mention also is, I know people throw around the word LLC, I'm an LLC. Okay, I want to let you know that an LLC, at least a single member LLC, is not necessarily recognized by the IRS, okay? A single member LLC is really, or LLC altogether, is state recognition. And there are reasons why you want to become an LLC. And I advise all my clients, I don't care how small you are, I don't care if you're a mobile stylist, I don't care if you have a salon in your basement and it's just you. I usually advise all of my stylists to become an LLC for certain reasons. Now, that being said, that is a state designation. The IRS doesn't recognize an LLC or a single member LLC. As far as they're concerned, you are a sole proprietor. So you are treated the exact same way as a sole proprietor is treated for tax purposes when it comes to the IRS, okay? So I know often people say to me, well, I'm a single member LLC. Does my business pay taxes? Or is there some sort of connection between being an LLC that's going to help me with my taxes when I file them? And the answer is no. It doesn't really affect anything about how you are taxed, okay? If you are a partnership and you are a multi-member LLC because you're a partnership, okay, so that means that in the eyes of the IRS, you are a partnership, okay? They don't look at LLC and say, okay, because you're an LLC, we're going to tax you this way. The only difference is if you are a single member LLC or if you are a multi-member LLC, you can choose to be taxed as a corporation, whether a C corporation or an S corporation. So that is where that comes into play. So then, but if you're a sole proprietor without having gone and registered with the state, in other words, you're a sole proprietor and you're not an LLC, you cannot request to be taxed as a corporation because you're a sole proprietor. So if you ever decide that you want to be taxed as an S corp, you have to first become an LLC. Once you become an LLC, then you can then request to be taxed as a corporation with the IRS. But outside of that, being an LLC doesn't affect anything when it comes to the federal, when it comes to your taxes. Just want to let you guys know that, because sometimes there's so much confusion between that. And then at some point, I'm going to come on here and try to explain to you what the difference is between being a sole proprietor, an LLC, a partnership, S corporation, C corporation. Which one should you choose? Why should you choose it? I know there are a lot of times that people I know there are some accountants that tell their clients to become an S corporation. And the number one reason they say that is because if you become an S corporation, you're going to save money. Well, it is way more than that. It really is. Yes, you are going to save money, but it depends. It's not everybody saves money. It depends. So before you go off signing off to be an S corporation, be really, really careful, because there are so many rules and regulations attached to being an S corporation. One of which is making sure that everybody in the salon is an employee, including yourself, including your all of your stylists, including, everyone in that salon that works has to be an employee if you are a corporation. Nobody is allowed to come into your business and be a booth renter. You can't, you yourself, as I said, has to also be an employee. So there are so many rules and regs when it comes to being an S corporation that you want to really think about it. You want to get good counsel. That way you can make a very informed decision as to whether or not you should be an S corporation. Like, I never just tell my clients, okay, be an S corporation and here's why. I break it down to you bit by bit and let you know exactly why you should, exactly why Oh, if you do, or rather, I'll tell you, if you decide to become one, here is what you're going to have to be faced with. And I'm going to compare, I'll show you, okay, as a single member LLC or as an LLC, here is how much money you're going to make. Let's assume that you brought in that year $200,000. Here's what you're going to make if you're an LLC. Here's what you make as an S corporation, okay? That way you can look at the numbers to see, is it worth it, okay? That's one aspect. Second aspect is you want to look at the requirements to being an S corporation from the IRS's standpoint and from the state standpoint, and you want to say, okay, is it worth it? If I'm going to save $5,000 based upon how much money I made, is it worth becoming an S corporation based on the compliance requirements? And sometimes it's not worth it. It's just not. So you want to make sure you're making enough to make it worth it. Okay? All right, so let me look and see if there are any other questions in here. Okay, LeeAnn says, do you know how long it has been a requirement to give the salon owner a 1099? There are so many people who have never heard of this or think it is a new requirement. Okay, so really good question, LeeAnn. It's not a new requirement. It has been a requirement forever. The reason why people don't know is because they just don't know. And I would say people have been becoming hip because of the internet. A lot of people in this group have never heard of it. They've only heard of it because they were in this group, right? And that is what online social media has done for us as a country as a whole and as a business. It has made us so much more aware of things. Like, for example, when I was in my, early 20s, before social media, there was so much that I didn't know, okay, at that time. Now, I have a stepdaughter who is in her 20s, and she knows so much more than I did when I was 20 about certain things because there's so much access. Nowadays, you have no excuse. I say Google is your friend. Don't use social media and Google to make a final definitive decision for something that's really important, okay? But what Google and social media does, it helps you to be able to gather your questions. So when you meet a person like myself or an attorney, you know what kind of questions to ask. And not only that, you have some idea based upon what you read on the internet. So when they start talking, you can maybe kind of tell if they at least know what they're talking about. But keeping in mind that not everything on social media is right, okay? So you don't want to take it and say, well, you're wrong because I heard on Facebook, or I went to Google and then I heard this and therefore you're wrong. No. Google and Facebook and social media just gives you information. So that way you're starting to understand the issue. You're starting to be able to put together the types of questions that you want to ask, okay? So you're becoming informed. And then when you meet with a professional, you can ask the question that you need to ask and you'll be able to make sense of your questions. So that's it. So yeah, so it's nothing new. It's just that people are now becoming aware of it. And believe it or not, a lot of people still don't know. I would say maybe 20% of people probably know. The others who have nothing to do with social media or who just stay in their bubble, they have no idea. So that's the reason why. Okay, the next question is from Victoria Daniel, and she says, does that payment by credit card you stated about the makeup artist question apply to sweeten? Okay, so here's the thing. If you pay anybody with a credit card, I don't care if you're paying your rent with a credit card, I don't care if you're paying your landlord, the owner of the salon with a credit card, I don't care if you're paying somebody that you contracted, whether they're a makeup artist or whatever. If you pay anybody with a credit card, you don't have to give them a 1099, okay? The IRS, or rather, depending upon how much you pay out, you're likely, the person that you pay the money to is likely going to get a 1099K from the person. In other words, let's say you use Stripe and you pay somebody with a credit card and it goes through Stripe, and you pay that person a certain amount of money, it's Stripe's responsibility to provide the person that received that money with a 1099-K. So therefore, you're not required to give them a 1099 miscellaneous, okay? The responsibility is taken out of your hand and put into the hand of the third party that you're using, which is a credit card company or PayPal or whoever you decide to use. So the answer is, if you pay with a credit card, don't worry about it. You're good to go, okay? Okay, so Laura Bauer is asking, I hear we need to file by tomorrow. I can't find it. I can't find a form, and it says outline at the IRS that we can't use the red copy. Confused. Well, Laura, why don't you just go online and file? I think I provided, and what I'll do is I'll put a link in here when I can figure out how to put the links in. I'll put a link in here to the software that I normally use. Just go online and do it. It's like $3.15 for one 1099. Okay, that's the best way to do it, because yeah, sometimes with those forms it can get a little bit confusing, and quite frankly, I don't use them anymore. So for me to answer your question, I have to almost just go back into my brain and try to answer the question. But I just do everything electronically. It's so much easier, it's so much cleaner. You don't have to worry about paperwork and all of that. So I suggest you do that. Okay, so another question from Trisha Wilson. She said, what if the salon owner won't fill out a W-9? Okay, Trisha, we already talked about that. I'm going to put a link in here to a blog that I wrote that explains to you exactly what you need to do if the person who you want to give a 1099 to refuses to fill out a W-9. Okay, just follow those directions and you should be good. Okay, so this is from Trisha Wilson again. It says, today is the deadline. Yes, it is. Will business tax, okay, today is the deadline. I'm stressed. Will business tax number be what I put in tax ID? Okay, or social security number, if it won't fill it out. So Trisha, if they give you their EIN number, the EIN number is what you're going to put in the box that says EIN. If they give you their social security number, then you put the social security number in there. Now, I advise people, for those of you on here that are salon owners, try not to, don't give people your social security number. That's just too much information. I suggest just go online to irs.com and apply for an EIN number. You'll get it within about 5 to 10 minutes. Apply for an EIN number and use that. Even if you're a sole proprietor, it doesn't matter. Anybody can apply for an EIN number. You don't have to be an LLC. All you have to be is a person who is doing business. And that's it, okay? And today is the deadline, so that's another reason why you should probably go in and use the online software, because if you do it today, you're good to go. Now, if you do decide to mail it out, just make sure it's post-stamped or postmarked before 12 midnight today. Okay? Okay, and Victoria McDaniel says thank you, and you're most welcome. All right, so let's see. I think I have one more question. It says, I didn't file a 1099 miscellaneous for rent paid over $600 last year to the salon owner. Am I in trouble? Well, the question is, or rather, she says that she paid her landlord over $600 last year. Or was it last year? Yeah, last year, and didn't provide her landlord with a 1099. Is she in trouble? Well, the IRS police are not going to come knocking on your door, so don't worry about that. The IRS doesn't know that you didn't give her a 1099. Okay, so you're not in trouble in the sense that they're going to come looking for you. Now, here is how you can possibly find yourself getting in trouble. If you ever get audited by the IRS for whatever reason, then they're going to look at your deductions, and one of your or one of your accounts or deduction lines is going to be payments. It's going to be rent. Now, whatever it is, let's say it's a couple of $1,000, depending upon what they're auditing. Because keep in mind, when the IRS audits you, they may not necessarily be auditing your entire tax return. They may just be auditing a particular line item. Like, for example, they may want to audit just business meals, or they may want to just audit mileage, or they may want to just audit contractor deductions. So the things that have a red flag, or rather the things that are considered a red flag, are the things that they may want to audit. So it's not necessarily, so if they send you a letter and say, we want to audit your contractor payments, they're more than likely not going to go through your entire tax return and start looking at all them, because I used to be an auditor, and it will depend upon what I'm there for. If I'm there specifically to audit contractor payments, I stick to contractor payments. I don't diverge. Now, not to say that I wouldn't diverge, it just depends. It just depends on why. But for the most part, I used to just stick to what it is I was there for. And for the most part, that's what the IRS and the states do. So if for some reason they are auditing contractor payments, they're going to want to find out if you sent a 1099 to the people that you were supposed to send them to. If the answer is no, then they're going to want proof that you paid this particular person the money that you said you paid them. Once they get the proof that you actually paid the $5,000 or whatever it is, then they'll say, okay, well, you were required to provide this person a 1099, but you didn't. So in that case, you're going to get penalized, and you are going to have to pay interest and penalties, which can get really, really expensive, depending upon how many 1099s we're talking about, and depending upon how long it's been. So the longer it's been since you were supposed to provide them a 1099, the more you have to pay. But there is a ceiling that they won't cross. So they'll say, okay, you can get fined up to, let's say, $10,000 or whatever the case may be. After that, that's as high as we're going to go, no matter how long it's been since you did not provide them with a 1099. So that's really the only way that the IRS will, where they'll find out that you didn't provide them with a 1099. And then, of course, what they may do, and sometimes one audit may cause another. So the person that you paid, they may go back and see, okay, well, did this person at least report the income that they received from you, even though you didn't give them a 1099? And, sometimes it can just become a whole domino effect. But that was a long answer to your question, which is you can get in trouble if you're audited, possibly. Okay. All right, let's see if there are any more questions. Let's see, LeeAnn says, what happens if they don't get it done today? Oh yeah, absolutely. She says, should they still send it? Yes, absolutely, you should still send it. What happens if you don't get it done today? Well, if it's not sent in today, that's when the penalties start to kick in. So you have until, let's say the penalties work this way. It's due today, but you don't send it until for another 30 days. So there is a penalty structure for not having it sent between 30 days to when it was due. Then there is another 60-day carve out. Then there is a 90-day carve out. So depending upon how long it takes you to get it out will determine how you're penalized. Now, are they going to penalize you? Not necessarily, or maybe they will. The IRS is sometimes are very inconsistent in their behavior. So even though they say this is what is required, your friend over here may have done the exact same thing you did, and you might get a letter saying, okay, so you owe this amount of penalties and interest for not preparing and filing your 1099 on time. And your friend over here may receive absolutely nothing. And you're wondering, well, what happened? How come she got one or I got one and she didn't? Well, I have no answer for that other than the IRS sometimes can be inconsistent. They do have their laws and their rules, which are what they are. But in terms of how they follow them, there can be some inconsistencies there. So that's why I always say never compare your case with somebody else's, because sometimes it's going to be different. So just because so and so it didn't happen to so and so, that means that it won't happen to me. It's not necessarily the case. It's just a matter of whether or not the IRS closed their eyes, shook a bag, and pulled your name out, or however it is they do it. That's how, that's pretty much, how it works when it comes to the IRS. So, okay, so if there are no other questions, I am going to sign off. Okay, so Laura has a question. She says, so do I need to submit a 1099 to the owner of the salon and federal and state? Laura, use the online software. I'm going to leave a link in here so that that way you can pull it up and use it. And I think I have a video. Matter of fact, I think I have a video that I actually dropped in the group, which shows you how to use the software to file your 1099s. And I left a link for the software. So my suggestion is just use that, because you're making it a little bit too confusing for yourself. It's not that serious. It really isn't. Just go online, fill it out. Your part is done. But make sure after you fill it out and complete it, that you print a copy and send it to your landlord. Just make sure you do that. And that really is supposed to go to your landlord also by today, January 31st, okay? Okay, so I don't see any other questions. Send someone a link, other stylists and salon owners a link for them to watch this, okay? My goal is to try to educate the beauty industry, because when I went to cosmetology school back in the day, and not only then, even now, there are no classes on business when it comes to what we do. The only thing that the part of business that we learned when I was in school was everything to do with shop duties, and that was it. There was nothing about how to actually run a business, which is a shame, because in our industry, the nature of our industry is that a lot of us become business owners because we become booth renters. Okay, we go in, we're employees for a while, but a large number of stylists are really business owners because we are booth renters. Okay, because we're salon suite owners. So I think it's imperative that cosmetology schools should be teaching something about business to prepare the cosmetologists for the real world. Because when you come out into the real world, there's so much involved about, around starting a business, other than just jumping up and going behind a chair and doing the work. And we're missing that in this industry. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it. I do a lot of complimentary, or rather, I offer a lot of complimentary services to our industry, usually in masses, not necessarily one-on-one. I do consultations, but I have so much content out there that is geared towards our industry, because I really want to try to help fill in that gap from what we missed as students when we were in cosmetology school. So I like to fill in, I want to bridge that gap between what we didn't learn in cosmetology school and what we should know as business owners. It's so important, because I work with so many hairstylists and so many salon owners that don't know, what they're doing business-wise. And then the worst, I have to say, is when I'm dealing with salon owners who have misclassified their employees. That's huge, because it affects the stylist and it affects the salon owner. The stylists are affected because when somebody is taking 50% of your money, okay, and you have to turn around and pay income tax and pay self-employment tax on that 50%, I mean, it's quite bad, because what's happening is you're being taxed. I mean, you're only making a small portion of what you should have made, because if you're a commissioned stylist and you're 50-50, really you're an employee. And therefore, half of that self-employment tax is the responsibility of the salon owner and not your responsibility. Because if you're giving them half your money, at the very least, I shouldn't say at the very least that's what they should do, but by law, that's what they're supposed to do, because really you're an employee. And from the hair salon owner's perspective, I have sat in audits, payroll audits, where salon owners have had to shut down their business because of how much money they owe in payroll, taxes, and penalties and interest because of misclassification. It's a huge problem in our industry. And people think, oh, who will ever find out? I'll get away with it. Well, the way that the IRS, the state, the Department of Labor, and some insurance companies for workers' compensation in certain states, the way they find out is because somebody tells on you. Because if a stylist feels as if she was being cheated, well, I don't like to use the word cheated, because sometimes salon owners don't even really know what they're doing is wrong. But if she feels that she's been slighted, and she decides to go to report you with the Department of Labor, not because she's reporting you, maybe you fire her, and she decides, okay, I'm going to go get unemployment. Okay, so she goes to the Department of Labor to get unemployment, and they realize that, oh, well, this salon has not been paying in unemployment for you. That opens up a whole can of worms. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to start to investigate the salon and find out that you have people in your salon who you are misclassifying. That's how it starts. Second thing is, and the biggest thing, when a stylist who is getting half her money provides a 1099 to her accountant, and she gets hit over the head with taxes, and the taxes she's being hit over the head with is really self-employment tax, because I don't care, you got to pay self-employment tax. You can get away without paying income tax depending upon what your taxable income is. But no matter what your taxable income is, you are going to have to pay self-employment tax on your business net income regardless. So when they get these huge bills, they say, oh my God, why do I owe so much? Because you've already been hit over the head with only getting half your money, and now you're getting hit over the head again, having to pay self-employment tax. What happens is, usually the accountant will say, okay, do you feel like you were misclassified? And they say yes, because the accountant will tell them, if you were, this is what's going to happen. Well, of course, they're going to say yes. Now, all of a sudden, they have to fill out certain forms, and now the IRS is alerted with what's going on. That's a second way you get in trouble. And it's like a domino effect, because the minute the IRS finds out about it, they inform the state, then the Department of Labor finds out about it, and then if you're in a state where workers' comp is required with an insurance company, they find out. Next thing you know, you have 4 agencies on your behind trying to collect money from you because you misclassified your workers. It's messy. So I always suggest that you, as a salon owner, you want to make sure that you are following the rules. Do not misclassify your workers, because if you ever get busted, you'll get in trouble. And I say you may or may not get in trouble. It just depends on whether or not you get busted. But do you want to play IRS Russian roulette? I don't think so. Okay, so that's my little soapbox for today. So I think I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'd like to thank LeeAnn for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys. I think there's another question. Okay, one more question. Brittany asks, I'm a salon owner. Do I have to send 1099s to the building owner who I pay rent? Okay, I think I discussed that earlier. Okay, so here's the answer to that question. It depends. It depends on whether or not you're paying a property manager, whether or not you are, or a real estate agent, whether or not you are paying a person who actually owns the business, and therefore it's really rental income to them because it's like passive income, or whether or not you are paying a person who is in the business of renting properties. If you are in the business of renting properties, then you get a 1099 with the rent that was paid going in box number 7. If the person is the owner of the building, who all they do is really just collect the rent, where they're not in the business of renting properties, they just are a real estate owner. Like, for example, I own real estate. I have a couple of rental properties, okay? So I have some Section 8 tenants in my properties. So every year I get a 1099 from the state, from the local government, with rents paid in box 1, because I'm not in the business of renting out properties. I am just a property owner. On the other hand, if I was an Airbnb owner, I can take that same property that I own right now and switch it into Airbnb. That changes things. All of a sudden, I am now in the business of renting out properties because Airbnb is a business. So in that case, when I get a 1099, if I get one, it should go into box 7, technically speaking. Now, if they are a real estate agent or a property manager, then you don't really have to give them a 1099 at all. My suggestion is to go speak with an accountant, so your accountant can contact your landlord and ask the appropriate questions, so that way you know whether or not you need to give them a 1099. Okay, so that's it, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to watch me run my mouth. And I'll be back on here, I don't know when, but at some other time, answering, dealing with other topics that I think that is very important for our industry. So once again, LeeAnn, thank you so much for having me, and have a great day, everyone.